Good morning, everyone, for today's distinguished webinar series in AI and cybersecurity. The title for today's talk is Biometric Security in the Age of Generative AI, from Anti-Spoofing to Health. Dr. Karimian, who is an assistant professor at the Lane Department of Computer Science and Electrical Engineering at West Virginia University since August 2022. Previously, he was a Tenure Track Assistant Professor at San Jose State University from 2018 to 2022. He holds a Ph.D. in Electrical and Computer Engineering from University of Connecticut. His research focuses on biometrics, hardware security, AI in healthcare, and trustworthy AI. Dr. Karimian has received several awards, including NSF CAREER Award and Best Paper Awards at IJCB and VLSID. He also received the Best Poster Award at FICS Research Conference on Cybersecurity. He serves on organizing committee for ISQED and SVCC and has been associate editor for IEEE Transactions in Circuits and Systems, Discovery Internet of Things Journal, and SN Computer Science Journal. Additionally, he is the co-founder and executive member of the Silicon Valley Cybersecurity Institute. Dr. Karimian, thank you again. It's a great honor to have you as part of UND's distinguished webinar series. Thank you for spending this morning with us, and the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you so much for a nice introduction. It is my pleasure to be here talking about my research. Although there are many research that I'm involving, but particularly I'm focusing on the biometric and the spoofing because looking at the age of the AI, Gen AI, so we see that how it's important to secure the biometric system and the privacy of the user's aspect. By the chance, do you see my slide or no?
No. Could you please share again?
Okay. All right, there we go. Let me see that again. How about now?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So here's the agenda. I'll be talking about the biometric. What is biometric and different modality that exists. Then I will be talking about the vulnerability of the biometric system. It's not just one single aspect. There are many biometric vulnerability which exist, so need to be tackled, need to be addressed. And then I will be talking about the biometric spoofing attack. Why is that important? How we can address that, specifically when it comes to the area of the Gen AI. And then we'll branch to the application of biometric in health. If there's a time, I will be talking about that. So when it comes to biometric, so there are many biometric that I mentioned here, but the largest or the famous one is the fingerprint, face, and iris. These are the most famous biometric which exists. And perhaps we have seen many application that we encountered, like admitted to the U.S. border. But if you travel outside of the country, you will see they're capturing the iris. If you travel to Dubai, but if you travel to Europe Union, so you will see they capturing the face and other biometrics as well for the record of identification and verification purpose. We also have the palm print and the DNA. These are the large legacy data set for the forensic application and criminal. And that's the primarily application of those biometric. And then on the left side, you will see that we have hand geometry, palm print, fingerprint, signature, the voice. Those are the commercialized application that has been used. For example, banking system for healthcare application. And then the last two row in the bottom, you will see we have gait, pace-stroke dynamic, scleral, EKG, ECG, ear. Those are the new types of the biometric was introduced. These are pretty new, but in the niche application for the purpose of the verification, but not yet to be a lot of research need to be done in order to improve the result, improve the performance and accuracy and robustness. When it comes to biometric, there are many applications. Again, these are some of the example when it comes to your mobile phone, to a smart home, if you travel, and if perhaps most of the U.S. airport, they're integrating the biometric system for both TSA, also access to the gate. And so these are examples from the IAD. So most of the travel that I do is the closest one. So although we have the Pittsburgh, we have the biometric system, but not deploy the biometric system on the gate level as well. And if you're going to bypass this, the line TSA, probably seen the clear blue where you could register yourself for eyes and face, and you can bypass. And again, and then if you travel to the metropolitan area like San Francisco, Seattle, New York City, you will see the Amazon Go, where your Amazon account is linked to your bank account, and you can go grab anything, and then it will be linked to your account based on your face identity. Verify yourself, and then it will check out the any purchase that you made. The most or current research or development that has been integrated is looking at the integration of the biometric and autonomous system, where you're sitting on the car, everything will be adjusted automatically based off the user preference, like pull up your navigation, play your favorite music, and perhaps looking at your health status as well, whether you have motion, you have the stress level, things like that. Those could be extracted from the biometric data as well. Although there are a lot of advantage associated with the biometric, with the user convenience, you don't need to remember the password. I mean, everything is cool, but it comes with some challenges, and that include some of them, which you can see here: template, biometric spoofing, privacy, fairness, and bias. So overall, we have two stages. One is for enrollment, the other is for verification. For enrollment, so we ask the user to collect the data, then we will have data processing, feature engineering, then we will store the data on the template, either the raw data or the transfer version of that, And when it comes to verification, again, same steps are same, except we have the matcher. We will compare the biometric data with the template. And if it is similar, then we will accept the user. Otherwise, it will be rejected. And as you can, hear that the similarity is important. We're not looking exactly the same, similarity, but we're looking at the similarity level. So this will be determining by the system. But when it comes to those, there are a lot of challenges and vulnerability exists. So you will see the first step is spoofing, how we're going to determine whether the data is fake or is real. And also, when you're going to store the data, how to make sure those data is not going to be compromised by attacker. If it is compromised, then you cannot revoke that because your biometric is stolen. Then we have to make sure the data either is stored in a different format, where if the attacker could access, wouldn't be able to retrieve the original biometric. That's called a template attack. But also, because the biometrics is noisy, is not going to be perfect, then there are a lot of auxiliary information so they must identify, and also the helper data need to figure out what are the specific noisy of the data that cause another challenge, which is called the side channel attack, which has not been explored in the biometric community. Not only when it comes to those attacks, but also we'll see the demographic bias. So most of the system, probably if you search that, there are a lot of newses regarding the bias in a face recognition or iris, other biometric modality. And the reason is because most of the data collected from Caucasian data, and the system, it's technically trained those data set when it comes to deployment, and it kind of maybe failed to other demographic, the people. And that's why the people in the company is starting to generate the synthetic version of that Gen AI, but also that caused another vulnerability, which called spoofing it. How are we going to distinguish between the spoof versus the genuine user if you're going to address the demographic? So you will see if you address one of them, that you technically open the door for another type of vulnerability on the biometric system as well. Now, why the biometrics spoofing is important? Because there are a lot of challenges, but most important is the looking at the generative AI, where you can generate the realistic data, which is very hard for user human to distinguish between the genuine versus the adversary example of that. All right, now we're going to talk about the spoofing example and what things that we are doing, and perhaps continuing on the challenges associated with that. Now, if you're just looking at this slide, and if I ask you guys to tell me which one of these images is fake and which one is, real, it is pretty hard. I mean, it's technically hard from visualization to figure out which one is real and which one is hard. And this is just for, a couple of years ago from IEEE Research Institute, they generate the synthetic version of that, although current situation, we can generate more realistic data, although this is hard to distinguish between the human eye. But overall, we will see it's very challenging to capture the synthetic version or the fake sample versus the genuine sample. And from this figure, the only one images on the top right is genuine, and the rest of them is generated by the GAN model. So it's pretty hard to distinguish that. And imagine how we're going to distinguish in the system where the deep learning should be able to figure it out which one is real and which one is fake. And again, it's not just for the face, but also it comes with the other biometric modality, iris, and you have a fingerprint. When it comes to fingerprint, you can generate a lot of the example. If you look at here on the right side, those are example of the, a fake sample of the fingerprint. Those are real example of the realistic, but there are more challenges when you generate the gum version or generate the, a paper printed, photo printed, or you can generate this, synthetic version using the GAN or Gen AI. When it comes to face, you can have the photo print, you can have the mask, you can have the makeup, surgical, plastic surgical. Those are very, very hard and challenging when it comes to spoofing attack detection. Now, so here I will be talking about the the contactless fingerprint anti-spoofing technique and the challenges associated with that. Although we have done the anti-spoofing on other biometric modalities such as face, but just giving some idea what's the challenges, what's the technique that exists, how we can handle those. So why we care about the contactless biometric again? So after the COVID, everything was remote, everything was hygiene and safety was very important. But also when you have the contact base, it might not be convenient for the user to touch the sensor. Now, the contactless base, it's provide more convenient for user or preference, and also the hygiene and safety as well, and then also speed as well. But again, so when it comes to that, it has a challenges because compared to the contact base, we will not be able to capture all the minutiae extra value from the fingerprints. Although contact base also vulnerable, but when it comes to contact base, it's more challenging and it's very easy to be fooled by the system because you're not capturing a detailed representation of the pattern of the minutiae on the finger. So what's the existing solution on the biometric contactless or also other biometric on the spoofing? Most of the system, what we're doing is just train the system based on the creating a fake sample of that and let the deep learning to distinguish between the real versus the fake sample. But however, that comes with the challenge because nobody knows what will happen in the future or when it comes to unseen sample. And that's caused the problem of the fooling the system by generating more realistic fake sample or come up with the new strategy to generate the fake sample. Now, the system that need to be designed should be less rely on the creating the fake sample, let the train the model and understand that, because ultimately we will generate the more realistic sample every other day. So what we're doing here, we're going to demonstrate two types of the system that we designed. One is the unsupervised. The other is the semi-supervised. When it comes to unsupervised, we'll only train the model using the autoencoder. You will see here on the bottom, right side, this is autoencoder. which we have the the different the C-band, which is the channel base, and attention looking at the channel, and a spatial domain as all the genuine user, and we will train exclusively on the real data. We're not considering any fake sample on during the training, and we're expecting to create a sphere around those real sample. Anything beyond that sphere we'll be considering as the fake sample. Also, we come up with the supervised, semi-supervised. Now, what we did technically, we generate the synthetic version of the sample using the style GAN. So we have the genuine user. We will train on based on the style GAN to make it a GAN model or a synthetic version of that. And then we will train based on those. We will not train the other types of the biometric modality. And what in the testing phase, we're expecting to our model to distinguish between the real and fake sample. So what database that we will be using, we use the three types of the data set. These are two which we are mentioning here. One from the Clarkson here, which they have so looking at the green table, there are different types of the fake sample, in terms of the dragon skin, Equiflex, gel fix, and gelatin glue, latex, Play-Doh. These are, if we're just looking at the here right there, those are kind of demonstration example of this fake sample. But again, that's captured from the real one. But trying to generate that because at the end of the day, model is trying to distinguish. So trying to learn those pattern, minutia pattern, and so it doesn't matter either we're gonna have the on the real fingers, or we generate it by glue or a latex or Play-Doh. But also we use the Colfie spoof dataset, which this is another database from Europe Union folks, which they created another fake sample of the contactless fingerprint. Also, there is another data set, which is the IITD data, which contained a different spoofing sample, photo attack and printed, but more diverse, sample that we, consider was the Clarkson because it captured a lot of diverse data set. As I said, so those sample were not trained during the training phase. We will using for the testing to see whether we will be able to distinguish between the genuine user versus the fake sample. So the metric that we will be using for the evaluation, there are kind of three parameters involved. So BPCR, APCR, and then ACR. BPC, which called the bona fide presentation classification error, which measure how often genuine samples are incorrectly classified as a spoof. APCR measure how often a spoof sample are incorrectly classified as genuine, so technically wrong on a different direction. And then ACER, which is the average classification error rate per overall measure of accuracy, averaging by BPCR and an APCR. So these are the two predefined metric that most of the our biometric community are using that. So this is the first result demonstration based on the supervised learning, where we only train based on the genuine users and also the adversarial model, like the GAN model, style GAN. So if you look at here, APCR, it is pretty zero for all the data set from the Colfie spoof, and when it comes to other data set, so most if you look at this particular case, so those data set has the synthetic data Clarkson, but we're not training on the synthetic. We're only training based on our own generated synthetic version. If you just looking at this result, one thing is important to note is just looking at the photo paper, and the photo paper looks like it's more dangerous or more hard to distinguish compared to other. And one reason might be is because they're in the different color of the format representation of a spoof. When it comes to photo paper, there's no color; it's just the photo paper version of the actual the fingerprint. But also synthetic is quite a bit, there's small value on the BPCR, APCR, but it's not, high as the photo paper. Now, you'll see these are the two more, I would say, dangerous or more aggressive, type of attack that could be playing into the system. The other case that we investigated was based on the unsupervised, meaning that our model is trained exclusive on the just genuine user, and we consider the case that we were trying to detect the spoofing on the on the fake sample. Now this is just for Clarkson and Colfius spoof. This is what we're comparing with there are not too many paper that they're investigating on that. There are maybe, I would say, a couple of the paper that, or research that investigating on the anti-spoofing on contactless fingerprint, and our result is beating compared to them. And the reason is because, again, if you just look at here, their model is, trained on both genuine versus the fake sample. When it comes to unseen fake sample, they won't be able, because their model is trying to distinguish between the fake sample they have it in the training and also genuine user, but not on unseen data. But in our case, we just create a sphere around the genuine user. We're expecting anything about, beyond that sphere we'll be considering as the spoof. We're not telling what type of a spoof attack is that. We're just telling the, hey, this is the spoof attack. This is kind of the anomaly detection technique. Okay, now, so why biometric are more vulnerable to spoofing in the area of adversary? So usually when it comes to those type of spoofing, we already know that we're using social media like Instagram, X, we using the Meta platform, and there are a lot of apps there now is available. We're asking, hey, we're gonna generate another photo, or kind of playing with us to have our own data. So now having our data available publicly, attacker could have access to those and generate a spoofing example of that using the Gen AI model. Now that's why it is important to distinguish between the, or detect or those any spoofing on the biometric system, because imagine you're going to have a bank account and someone is trying to log into your bank account based on a spoof sample, or you're stealing your identity. So this is very dangerous. It's very important to keep the community safe and secure. So when it comes to generative AI, so a lot of Gen AI techniques exist. So DALL-E, Midjourney. So you see that you can have the prompt engineer where you can tell the Gen AI to generate what you're trying to generate, and it is very realistic. Some of them, and there are just few example of that. And imagine you have access to genuine user or any of the face, iris, or fingerprint from the social media, and let the Gen AI to generate realistic version of that to bypass the biometric system. But also when it comes to biometrics, so there are kind of vulnerable to the bias and fairness, and the reason is because the model or the data set is available is limited to the specific demographic group, and that's going to come up with another problem where the people are starting to generate the synthetic version of that to make the system to train the system based on the diverse of the data. But once you train the data based on the synthetic version of that, so you're technically letting the system to understand the synthetic, to learn that, and then how you're going to distinguish on the on the spoofing example why you're training based on the synthetic version of that. This is very challenging, is debating how we're going to address that. So the another approach, instead of synthetic, instead of the figuring out by the deep learning based on the genuine versus the spoof sample, is just using the liveness detection. So liveness detection is the best because it is just telling the whether person is live or not, and it's very hard to clone that. And some of the example of live detection is, let's say, your heart rate or your EKG, which is inside of your body, and it's very hard to clone that. And that's the case. So And that's the most of the people are trying to figure it out whether it's possible to use the liveness detection or multimodal biometry using the other biometric modality. And an example would be ECG. Now, ECG is technically is the heart signal, is electrical activity from your heart signal, which consists of the multiple component, P, Q, R, S, T component. That's reflect on the different part of the heart, the polarization to repolarization. And if if you have the a wearable device, a Samsung, an Apple Watch, perhaps you see how it will be collected your data with just having the sensor in the bottom of the the sensor, and also there's the crown, which you can touch the opposite hand, will collect your ECG signal. And if you go to the hospital, hopefully not, so you will see there are different electrodes that could be attached to your body, your arm, your foot, and feet, and your chest as well, which 12 overall is a 12 lead, which collect your ECG to monitor your health status. But why is that important? Now, there are many research that have been investigating either is EKG is possible, would that be possible choice of the biometric modality, whether it's possible to generate the uniqueness characteristic from one person to other person. And this is just an example. I demonstrate here data collection for each user, subjects number 1 to subject number 4. There's a different pattern that is pretty unique, and we can assume this is distinguishable, not unique because we're not measuring entire of the people in the board. That's saying that this is uniqueness. But how is distinguished? Because if you look at the PQRS component, that could change from one person to other person, depends on the position of heart, depends on how it's going to be functioning, and that's why it's quite a bit saying that we could use that as a biometric modality. But also looking at the different session or different over the different time, a period of time, whether the biometric modality is in the ECG biometric modality are going to be consistent, is not going to change. And you will see in the plot within the 1 hour and within the 6 months, so showing that some of the components are pretty robust, not changing over the time. And so if I'm going to categorize the ECG biometric, it could be categorized in terms of the handcrafted versus non-handcrafted. The handcrafted will do feature engineering, extracting the component like the amplitude, duration, and slope, things like that. The other hand, we do let the deep learning to extract that and skip those hand engineering. And there are different data sets available and publicly from the FICS unit, although there are different group from the Toronto University. They have their own data set for the purpose of the biometric. But overall, the case is just similar to other biometric. We will have the pre-processing, do feature extraction, and then do the template. And then again, so because we don't need the entire of the sequence, just less than 1 second, that would be enough to use it as the source of the input of the biometric modality. Now, many people believe that it's it's being used for liveness detection. Nobody can clone that until our group and another group from the Oxford, they'll explore whether it's possible to spoof the ECG as well. And so if I'm going to tell you, this is the NIMI band, which is commercialized biometric modality exists. And so similar to the wearable devices or Apple Watch, there is 2 different electrodes. One is at top, the other is in the bottom of that. When you touch the other hand, opposite hand on the top, it will collect your ECG, where you can use it for any types of application when it comes to biometric application. So we're trying to, whether it's possible, explore it is vulnerable to spoofing or not. Now, we assuming again, as I mentioned, it is internal of your body. It's hard to clone that, but we assuming we have an access to ECG victim just less than 1 second, and we were trying to generate the synthetic version of that, not using the GAN, but we're talking about how we can generate that. But we assuming we don't have access to the algorithm, we don't have knowledge about the any kind of the processing they're doing, but we can inject the synthetic version that we generated using the arbitrary waveframe or auto audio play. Now, there are two different types of attack we consider. The one is the cross-device attack, the other is the cross-subject attack. So cross-device attack, as I mentioned, there's 12 leads of ECG could be collected when you attend the hospital, and the NIMI ban is just the single lead. So what we're trying to do, trying to map from the genuine of the user from the other biometric, ECG data collected from different sensor and map it to the NIMI ban version, which is the I2. So this is the version of the NIMI ban. We're trying to map other sensor or other signal to that. Now, so what we come up with the equation where you will see that the ECG looks like the Gaussian function, where different Gaussian function are put them together to generate that waveform. And we can assuming, hey, if you extract the PQRS component, and if you look at here and then find those the angular, the position, and the widths of those Gaussian function, we'll be able to generate those the synthetic version of that. Now, what we did technically, we have access to the 1 second of the ECG victim. So we have attacker, where either is going to be from other sensor or other subjects. So we extract those parameter, both victim and attacker. Then dynamic model going to map those parameter to each other. Then after that, we generate the noise model of ECG, because if you generate the clean ECG, the simple countermeasure will be able to distinguish whether it's synthetic data coming to the system. So we added the noise. Then how we added the noise? We generate the synthetic noise based on the public databases exist. So EBM, EMG, and NMA. So we collected from the PhysioNet dataset. We generate that noise. We combine with the original generated clean sample. And then after that, we have the more realistic ECG, then we inject that to the NIMI pan, whether it's measuring that possible to be mimicked or not. The second phase was the cross subjects, and for the cross subjects, we consider two types of attack. One was the offline, the other was the online. So for offline, we assuming have access to a powerful computer. We can do some nonlinear dynamic model mapping. And then again, same approach has been done here. So we extract the dynamic model parameter from that equation that I mentioned, like here. And then after that, we use the nonlinear square optimization to map between the attacker ECG to the the genuine user. And then after that, we generate the map ECG signal. Then we will inject to the system, whether it is bypassing or not. Now, if you look at here, one thing is important, because how we can control those parameters. You will see here we have alpha parameter, beta, B parameter, and theta parameter. And those, each of them is in charge to control the different part of the ECG signal. And you can shrink it. We can have higher amplitude. We can have the lowered interval by those three parameter. And after the nonlinear optimization, then we will be able to generate or semantically mimicking the genuine user. For online spoofing attack, one thing we found, just if I'm going to refer to the first slide regarding the ECG, there was on the left side, on the left top, was demonstrating the different type of the feature, like the P, QRS component, interval, and amplitude. We found that those are quite a bit linearly related to from one subject to the other subject. And then from there, we found that there is a kind of the scaling factor, and use that scaling factor to propagate it to the dynamic model from the attacker spec. Then we will generate the synthetic version of that and add them to the system. Now, when it comes to demonstrating whether it's possible to mimic or fool the system, ECG biometrics system, we will demonstrate on the result. And you will see here, based on the cross subjects versus the cross device, what the different type of the feature considered, fiducial, non-fiducial, online and offline. And the accuracy, the success rate of attack was 96, which is pretty huge, and showing that the ECG biometric based system, it's technically vulnerable. And then again, so when you're saying that vulnerable, if we have access to one of the sample of the ECG, although it's internally be assuming if you have access to that, then let's say if attacker could access to hospital record of the person ECG, then we will be able to generate that attack. So we spent a lot of time to figure out what's the countermeasure framework, and we found that if you collect the PPG and ECG together, there is a two parameter which called PT, the pulse transmission time, and pulse PAT, which technically is hard to mimic that and clone that, and we use it as one step to figure out either those biometrics are synced to each other. If it is not synced, if it is not coming from the same subjects, you won't be able to generate that. So that will be considered as one step to use a countermeasure. Other countermeasure, if you originally change the heart rate variability of the genuine user, then the attacker won't be able to figure out, even have access to the original one, because we already changed the heart rate variability of the user. And those data, of course, need to be stored as a helper data. Now the PPG is one of the things that we could help to help to come up with the countermeasure of the ECG as a liveness detection. Now, then we started, hey, what is possible to extract the PPG? I mean, the PPG from the contactless fingerprint. There's not too many database from the contactless fingerprint were collected from the video recording. So what we did, we extracted from the face data, which there's a lot of video recording exists on the facial data recording, plus the ground truth of PPG. And we were trying to demonstrate that what is possible to generate the PPG signal from the facial data and from the contactless fingerprint of the person. So although they could be used for anti-spoofing, or we could generate that as a multimodal liveness detection. But also you can imagine if you're sitting in a car and, if you have a camera, the camera collect your PPG signal and an ECG signal, tells you, hey, whether you have heart arrhythmia or not, or you have a stress, what is your stress level? What is your motion? Things like that could be extracted. And there are a lot of applications you can imagine that could be associated with that. Now, the remote PPG is not the new concept. Has been a lot of research has been investigated on that. The purpose was to extract the remote or photoplasmography of the person using the facial video. But the challenges associated with that is whether the actual data it is generated or reconstructed, whether it is mimicking original of the ground truth or not. Many of work has been focusing on extracting heart rate rather than the morphology or actual ground truth signal. And that might not be useful case when it comes to liveness detection, because you can find different people have the same heart rate, and we won't be able to use that as a metric or parameter as a liveness detection unless if you have able to reconstruct the original the PPG data. So what's the actual PPG data? If you just look at here, this is kind of the actual PPG data, which component including the systolic, diastolic notch, and diastolic peak. And that's pretty kind of unique. And that's why when you combine it with the ECG, you can generate the PAT and PDD as a parameter of the liveness selection. There are, as I mentioned, there are many papers that investigated on that, but most of them, it just focuses on the heart rate rather than the actual, reconstruction of the signal. So what we're trying to do, we're trying to come up with some algorithm and architecture to generate the more realistic or reconstruct the original one rather than heart rate, because heart rate is not be able to use it as the liveness detection. So what we consider technique, we're considering the architecture where we have unit with the transformer. But I'm going to talk about how we use that. But before that, preliminary information of the those information. We have the GAN, which most of you know that. There is the generator and discriminator. Generator in charge to generate the realistic sample. Discriminator is in charge to distinguish between the fake sample versus real one. until we fool the discriminator, we won't be able to distinguish between the generated versus the real world sample. On the other hand, we have these are introduced by Google researcher, and we have the transformer. So because we're looking at the PBG signal, which is the series of signal series, and is pretty long signal series. Other platform like the LSTM won't be able, because it won't be able to capture long dependency between each of the component of the PBG, and that's why we use the transform. I want to talk about how we integrated that. Also, we use the unit architecture again. So this is the well-known model. It's primarily used for for biomedical application. We're trying to generate the semantic segmentation of versus the tumor versus the actual tissue. But however, after that, there are many research followed that and use it for computer vision tasks. The architecture is just to have two components, which is the contraction phase versus expansive path. Contraction phase is just increasing the level of the channel and decreasing the spatial information. And we have the on an expansion, we have increasing the number of the spatial domain and decreasing the channel. Both of them were trying to generate the semantic, but our goal is to maintain the high level of the representation of the PPG at both spatial domain and also the temporal domain. So that's why we integrated the twin transformer on the unit architecture, and we'll also define the as a backbone. We'll also define the loss function, because not only we're going to generate the heart rate, which is going to be more realistic to the ground truth heart rate, but also reconstruct the original PPG signal. Now, we define a different, a loss function. So we use the sparsity loss, variance loss. We use the dynamic time warping on the different domain. One is the time domain, the other was on the frequency domain. But also we generate the second derivative. Second derivative will tells you the more detailed information of the PPG, and we're trying to make sure either the reconstructing a PPG will be able to mimic or resemble the second derivative of the PPG as well. So this is nobody figured out, because their focus was just the heart rate rather than the signal extraction. When it comes to frequency domain and the second derivative, and you will see here we use the wavelet transform, and the way that we use the wavelet transform, we use the DB4 because it's kind of similar pattern of the PPG signal. Also, we use the second derivative, and you will see the second derivative has the other component A, B, C, D component. So that component, technically, it's extra information. Let's say if you're trying to distinguish the user from one user to other user as a biometric, but also let's say trying to figure out the age of the user or gender, those information will be used as auxiliary information to detect and identify those. And so, well, this is the two things so we kind of consider, but also we consider the loss function on, again, frequency domain, on the second derivative, and time domain. On the loss function, we use the dynamic time warping, sparsity, and variance loss, and you will see here. So we extract those components. You might wonder, hey, how is it possible when it comes to on the GAN model to generate that? Well, this is we have the ground truth. By knowing the ground truth component, we can extract those, systolic, diastolic component, but also A, B, C, D from the second derivative. Then we'll use those indexes and into the generated part to make sure it's mimicking or not. And based on that, the loss will be adjusted accordingly to minimize the error over the time of the training. For experimental setup, so we use a different evaluation metric, Pearson correlation, FD. We also use a different data sets, pure UBFC, OBF, MRI, and IRP. So those are the available data set which has a different subjects, different time of the facial recording and PPG, and we'll technically trying to make sure whether the model that we proposing it is resembling or reconstructing original data. So we have two different evaluation. One, we compare our model with the existing one in terms of the heart rate, or called BPM. And you can see here the different benchmark that we will be comparing. But also we're not comparing, we're trying to measure the actual ground truth comparison with the actual generated. And so unfortunately, we could not have access to all the public data, GitHub repository of those papers that they mentioned their algorithm, but we had access to contrast phase and dual GAN because their model was available. And here we just test their model in terms of the reconstruction of the original ground truth versus the generated one. And if you look at here, our model is perform significantly compared to existing one, and obviously the reason is because they're just looking at heart rate rather than ground truth. We tested on the cross data set, and you will see here, meaning that we train on the one public data set and tested to other data set, and perhaps you will see we train on a UPFC. And this is just for generalizing the model, whether our model is generalized, because you're not expecting to train all the people, all the data set, and your model should be trained on exclusive on some of the data set. Any upcoming or unseen sample should be able to get the answer correctly. So now this is kind of the preliminary result demonstrating whether it is possible to generate that. Now, at the current level, so we're collecting the data set from the both ECG and PPG and facial recording from the face and fingerprint. And so this is, we're collecting the data, we already demonstrating the result. So this is not going to be discussed because it's under the patent review, but the overall idea is to generate both PPG and ECG from contactless fingerprint and facial data for the purpose of the liveness detection, but also you can use it for other purpose of the application. Let's say healthcare application, because imagine you have a camera and you're going to hold that and tells you, hey, what is your heart rate, or whether you have heart arrhythmia or not, rather than having the wearable devices other than that. So let's say camera on the system, surveillance camera, or via camera set up on your house, or we have a camera dash cam on the on your car, all tells you those information. Will be continuous heart rate monitoring, but also you can use that as the liveness detection, because again, one of the most challenges of the biometric and the spoofing detection is whether we can combat with the synthetic data. And this is what we're trying to do, that, but it's possible to generate the PPG or ECG from the synthetic data versus the genuine user. And we found that those data set we were generating from synthetic, it's quite a bit different from the genuine user, and that's why it is important to use it as a liveness detection, or you can use it as a combined multimodal biometric system rather than train the model based on the synthetic data. And because it's not going to be generalized when it comes to unseen types of attack, and model is always going to fail. And again, so that's why it's important to come up with the liveness detection. So I know it's passing the time, and that's why I kind of skipped the model that we consider for for IMD devices, where you can use the ECG and generate the key from the ECG, and we use the blockchain as one sort of the communication between the doctor and patient. So I'm kind of skip that because it's a lot of detail, and I think is out of the time supposed to be in the 30-minute 35. Hopefully I catched on time. But in the conclusion, biometric system, it's very interesting because it's giving a lot of opportunity in user convenience. We don't need to remember password compared to the biometric, but it comes with a lot of biometric in terms of the template attack, bias and fairness. in terms of the side channel, in terms of the hill climbing attack, in terms of the other attack. But although we are, research on those type of a biometric, but today talk was just a spoofing attack because we are on the age of the Gen AI, which you can generate the more realistic data. And I was going to demonstrate the sort of possible solution in terms of liveness detection based on the physiological extraction that you can extract from the other biometric. Let's say you have the face and contactless fingerprint, but you can extract those physiological signal without needing any other sensor, and that would be very huge benefit, because that's not only reducing the cost but also getting more realistic when it comes to implementation, because nobody wants to have a lot of sensor to be collected by themselves to make sure their biometric it's not going to be spoofed on by adversary. So that's pretty much it for my today talk. So if you have any question, I'm happy to answer that.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nima, for your presentation. Now, folks can put their questions on the chat if they have want to ask some questions. Maybe I'll start with the first question, and how realistic is this Gen AI is trying to mimic this fake P-wave intervals, or specifically PTT? Do you see, is it something that you see in papers that I'm just curious to see for
Yeah,
fake.
so that's a good question. We haven't tried that, but here's the thing. Although, so if you're just looking at the last couple of slides, generating the PPG, it is very challenging. Although we have ground truths, and you see many papers trying to generate the PPG, although we have a ground truth, but generating that systolic, diastolic, it is very hard. And not only it's hard because it changed from time to time, like 1 second to other second. Those systolic, systolic, diastolic, and diastolic notch variability changing, and that change also reflect on ECG. So the Gen AI should have access to human or kind of heart functionality or heart availability of the people, because at each stage you might have a different feeling. If you have a different feeling, a different motion, those is going to change, and that change are technically it's going to reflect both PPG and ECG. And if you don't have access to that, it's hard for Gen AI to generate those without any extra information. That's pretty hard to measure that. And that's why we consider those. Although it might be possible somehow, nobody, research. Our group also did not research, but that might be a challenge in down the road. If someone, hey, explore that, these are possible to be broken.
Thank you. And did you even consider replay attacks on these ECG, PPG signals? Did you
So
consider?
replay attack is another types of attack which is very important. They're kind of what technically, when it comes to that, there are many research have been addressing those. There is this part of the ECG biometric modality, because when it comes to sensor, you can, after the sensor, you can do some reply attack. Our group, we have not explored that. Our focus is in the template attack and also spoofing, because those are the much more difficult and more dangerous types of attack compared to, although its reply is important, but we haven't touched that. And although there are many research has been investigating and trying to come up with some countermeasure addressing those, but not from my group yet.
Thank you. You talked about wearable in context. Did you consider this noise versus attack on motion artifacts in your data, contactless biometrics?
Contactless fingerprint.
Mm-hmm. Did you use any, maybe this may not be related to the paper that you showed somewhere, you talked about contactless biometric challenges where, noise versus distinguish with noise versus attack. Maybe there are two motions are you capturing some movements artifacts as also?
Okay, so I think, so when it comes to contactless fingerprint, so so usually when it comes to contact base, so more accurate because it capture all the minutia of the fingerprint. But when it comes to contact, it depends on the resolution of image. It depends on the device. Will not be able to kind of exactly capturing those. Also, when it comes to the image is blurry or things like that, those are kind of the artifact that might impact the contactless fingerprint. But those, I think the motion artifact and or baseline wonder or kind of the electro myocardiogram, which is your muscle activity, those are the artifact which is part of the ECG signal. And perhaps when it comes to those, usually biometric is not going to be clear. I mean, it's not going to be clean because you can distinguish between different each of this component because there are, when it comes to frequency of those components, there have overlap. And if you're going to have a filter, design a filter to remove those, you're gonna, remove the actual ECG biometric data itself, which you're gonna you lose the actual information of the ECG. Now, the design is the kind of the trade-off. So alternately, we have to accept sort of the noise on the actual ECG data when it's come to training and testing. But when you're going to generate the synthetic that I demonstrated, I can go back to show that here. All right, so this is kind of the clean. I mean, it's nothing fluctuation in the system because we're generating the the fake sample, and the system will be able to to detect that because a simple countermeasure will say, hey, this is kind of the generated synthetic because not fluctuation on it. There is no frequency difference between the different time domain, but however. If you just look at right here, this is the actual noise. This is the actual noise which publicly available. We collected from PhysioNet. Although you cannot generate those, or you cannot generate after filtering, but the data set or the fake of or actual noise is available on the data set from the PhysioNet. So what we did, so if you just look at this figure, this is clean ECG, nothing, no fluctuation on it. So we integrate those noises and add it to the clean generated from dynamic model to make it more realistic, because when you have those noises, so you technically you're telling, hey, those frequency domain of the ECG is preserved because we already have access to the noise. Otherwise, if you have at the white noise or Gaussian noise, is still if the system working on the frequency domain, you'll not be able to bypass the system. So the noises that you're adding the system should be exactly the same as the ECG noise, which in our case is the baseline drift, EMG, which is your muscle activity, because when you attach the sensor, it captures ECG and muscle signal, and it's kind of overlap to each other. You can distinguish that, but also the motion artifact, which is called by MA, and that's kind of the reflection of those noises associated with the ECG signal, and we integrate all of them together in our attack scenario.
Thank you. We have another question coming. Can you share more on how values, that is weights, were chosen for loss coefficients? How do we decide which domain, time, or frequency gets a higher weight?
Right. Or referring to this one, right? This one. Okay. So is that correct? All right. There we go. So the weight. So here's three components. If you just go back to the all right. So this is the actual equation where we have the alpha parameter, theta parameter, and beta parameter. These are controlling the widths and the angular. So because we'll convert in the angular domain, and also we have the amplitude, which is controlling the amplitude. Now, so here's the thing. So first we have access to the one sample or 1 second of the victim, and we have our own data. So let's say I'm an attacker and I'm trying to mimic the other PPG, not just 1 second sequentially, let's say 10 second or 20 second, because that's the way, because it's based on the liveness detection. You have to continuously generate that. Otherwise, the system won't be accepting, having the same pattern and will detect that. You have to have a hardware availability over the time. So this is the component, and this is just for the time domain. Now in the time domain, so we are going to have the actual component where we're going to technically adjust that accordingly based on giving the 1 second of the ECG from the attacker and from the victim, and based on that we know that, hey, how much attacker alpha should be adjusted to make sure it's capturing the victim amplitude, for example, PQRST. Also, when it comes to interval, so we're going to control by betterment. Once is the alpha parameter. Those are going to be parallel, but just an example. When you're going to have the interval, so you can say, hey, the victim interval is shrinker than the attacker, so that need to be shrinker. Then we can, reduce the weight. So this is just an example. I can have the alpha 0.81, 82, 0.90. These are technically will be optimized by nonlinear optimization right here. So that's why we have nonlinear optimization. And once it's optimized, then rest of these sequences will be generated automatically.
Thank you. In the interest of time, maybe we'll conclude with one final question. I think you had somewhere in your slide the tau vector. You had considering the victim vector over attack vector, and then you had an equation that has S times gamma vector, right? Somewhere I saw that, right? Could you talk about how do you get numbers for these? How do you get this? What is
Okay.
this ratio?
So, that's why you refer to this slide. So if you just look at this slide, this is the ECG signal. And ECG, we're extracting it's called fiducial extraction. So extracting the component which include the P, Q, R, S, T, that's amplitude, but also the interval. So overall, we have 35 features that we can extract. And those features is technically reflect to that, vectors. And we found that there is a relation between the attacker and also the victim, and those going to be linear relation, because if you extract it from 1 second of the victim, 1 second of ECG, and then you have a scale down, you can put it on that equation to generate the sensitivity. And that's the actual value coming from this slide. That's why I think I mentioned that if you remember the beginning of the ECG biometric, we have 35 features, and those are coming from this table.
Super. I think we'll close the webinar. Thank you so much for your time, Dr. Nima. I think we'll be in touch. You'll receive a nice plaque from UND and also a nice letter from our dean. Appreciate your time for being with us this morning.